and we all have heard of it. As a New York Times reporter, John and I bumped into at the hearing for the city of Yes said, oh yeah, going to Vienna is like a mecca, right? For those who are interested in social housing. But I think we hear about it, but we don't always get to see it. So just wanted to give a sense. This image is probably the most well known because it is the Karl Marx Hof. Karl Marx Hof is one of the largest housing developments in the world. It's over a kilometer long, and now has 3,000 housing units. It started out with 5,000, but they in fact kind of right-sized housing in order to create that if a family of 4 could have a bigger apartment, they would make that possible, as opposed to the ways in which we often hear right-sizing here in the conversation around public and limited equity housing and social housing, making it smaller. So this is just over the 100th anniversary for social housing. 2020, Vienna celebrated. And to me, what was so interesting in thinking about the development of social housing is that at the same time, the newly elected Social Democratic Party in Austria was creating this kind of infrastructure of social housing, and they created over 60,000 units in a 10-year period. We in the US were creating an infrastructure for segregation and really for the kind of huge wealth accumulation of racial capitalism of white people, right? And so it feels really important to kind of remember that as we think about this kind of the blueprint and the ways in which these housing policies endure. Almost 100 years ago, right, was when the redlining and the subsidy in private housing development was taking place. That completely changed, the landscape of the United States. And at the same time, in Red Vienna, there was the development of the social housing infrastructure that, despite the fascists, right, coming to power in the early 1930s and the Nazis, still endures today. And so, to me, that's interesting. So this is an image that I feel like it feels really provocative because it is an image of actually Nazis distributing bread outside the Karl Marx Hof in 1934. And to me, I can't help but think about, right, this moment of fascism in the US and also the ways in which the food distribution, which is part of the kind of death dealing situation in Palestine, and thinking about those kinds of connections. And so so Red Vienna came to an end in 1934 with the fascist-leaning Christian Social Party staging a paramilitary coup. And they had battles between the right-wing nationalists and the socialists, communists, anti-fascists, and labor unions. And many of the workers took refuge in the Karl Marx Hof. And so kind of like what Stacey was talking about, the significance of place is also thinking about where working class communities, right, live, and those places as being really significant. And so, of course, they lost, right? But again, these places that were put into the infrastructure that was created endures. And so it endures to today. Over half of Vienna's 2 million residents live in some form of social housing, and average social housing rents are about $700 for a 1-bedroom apartment. And so in 1918, Vienna's population was about 2 million, the same as it is today, and it was living in very poor living conditions. Many people lived in what they called Bassena flats, which were dwellings of just one room and a kitchen, with the kitchen having light and ventilation from a corridor, a single water faucet called a Bassena, and one toilet per floor. And so these overcrowded conditions were used by bed lodgers, so people who would rent beds for half the day. So we know this continues here, right? I know in New York it continues, and across the US. So sleeping in shifts, so very unhealthy conditions. Also, the kind of epidemics, including cholera and tuberculosis, that would spread within these living conditions. And so then a rent cap was introduced. They called it, actually, it translates as a piece rent, to enable the population to afford their dwellings in the post-war period, so between World War I and World War II. And so roomers weren't taken in anymore, which actually made it more difficult for low-income groups to find accommodation. So what was created was a system of hofs, which is not a kind of monolithic structure, but was inspired by the Garden City movement. So kind of housing complexes that were around green communal gardens. And so what to me was really interesting was to think about their relationship to each other. I wanted to share with you a video from Zoran Mamdani because that's actually one of where I learned first about Red Vienna when I teach a class called I Heartbreak New York, Gentrification and Urban Change. Also because I think we need to hold Mamdani accountable to public and social housing and really thinking about social housing, not in distinction from public housing, but public housing actually being our greatest resource of social housing that we have here in New York.
And about 100 years back in time to take a look at just one example of how an alternative housing model got started in beautiful red Vienna. At the end of the First World War, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, leaving behind a number of successor states, including modern-day Austria, home to the former imperial capital of Vienna, the fifth largest city in the world. Despite being the seat of an empire, the chaos of the war and decades of neglect had left the working class of Vienna in desperate circumstances. Inflation was rampant, jobs were scarce, social services were non-existent, and hundreds of thousands of people were crammed into decaying tenements where overcrowding, disease, and violence were rampant. So it's no surprise that in 1919, at the first elections ever held in Austria where all adult citizens could vote, the Social Democratic Party swept into power at the municipal level on the promise of dramatic social and economic reform. And they delivered. The new government of Vienna implemented a huge range of services, including public health care and public childcare. They built high-quality hospitals, schools, and recreational facilities. But their crowning achievement was an ambitious program of social housing, what Americans call public housing, that began in 1923 and saw 60,000 new apartments constructed in the first year of its existence, built by the government and financed by taxes on the rich. But these weren't the kinds of apartments you might picture when you think of public housing in the United States, drab high-rises plagued by chronic neglect and underinvestment. Residents could enjoy leafy courtyards, wide open spaces, and plenty of natural light. They had shared laundries, state-of-the-art kitchens, food co-ops, bathhouses, pharmacies, lecture halls, schools, and swimming pools. These apartments were designed to be both beautiful to look at and beautiful to live in, fostering a sense of shared community among the people who lived there. And the best part was that because the city didn't have to worry about making a profit, just about paying off their maintenance costs, these homes were both much nicer and much cheaper than what workers had previously known. In 1926, the average rent in Viennese social housing was about just 4% of a monthly wage. The first 15 years after Austrian independence saw its capital transform from a symbol of urban blight into a beacon of socialist governance. It became known as Red Vienna, after the official color of the socialists who had pioneered these changes. And even though Red Vienna fell in 1934 when the country was seized by fascists, who did what they could to roll back social housing, that commitment to good, cheap housing remained after the Second World War. Today, an astonishing 62% of all city residents live in social housing, with the average monthly rent falling somewhere between $400 and $600 a month, with subsidies for lower-income tenants. That is a fraction of what people in America pay. Unlike in the United States, where public housing is treated as a worst-case way to house the very poor, Vienna's social housing residents are extremely diverse. Everyone except the top fifth of the population is eligible to live in social housing. This means there's broad appeal across many segments of society, which creates the foundation for its political popularity. That is how the majority of people in Vienna enjoy something that's considered almost utopian here in New York. Affordable housing that isn't just cheap, but desirable. Housing that isn't just four walls and a roof, but a real home with a sense of stability, safety, and community built in. Now, of course, this is only one example of an alternative framework for housing. And Vienna has not fully removed housing from the domain of the market. Residents still pay part of their earnings in rent to cover operational costs, and a sizable chunk of the population lives in private housing. But it's an actually existing alternative that shows us what a step toward a better world could look like.
Okay, I'm going to stop there, but you get a sense, and I feel like, again, we need to think about, this upcoming election. When I was there, and I visited 10 social housing developments, what was really notable to me, and you can get a sense from the visual here, is kind of how close many of them are. And I happen to be staying in this area called Margetten. And one thing that I think for those of us who are involved with community land trusts, one of the things is you need the land. And so Margetten was underdeveloped. It was not in the inner circle of Vienna. And so this land was available. And so I visited, and this is a little Google map I made. And so if anybody goes to Vienna, I can share it with you. And literally the Hofs, like they're all within blocks of each other. one way to think of it is almost like an urban archipelago where there's little islands, these like a necklace of these hofs or communal working class housing that are right next door to each other. And so it was also about kind of changing the public civic life. This is an aerial view that I found online, so you can get a sense of the significance of green space and the ways in which they're built. They were mostly low rise originally. So partly the inspiration for the housing came from this kind of sense of we want to build grand social working class housing, but they were trying to match the grandeur of the Habsburg kind of empire architectural style. And so this housing is grand and it's invested in. This is one of the hofs that is in this area called the Margetten, and they're all kind of along this big boulevard, but they have entrances that you can then walk into. Here's one. This is Haydenhof. So you can just watch them built after World War I. And actually, I'll just show you. This is a big courtyard, and then here's the kindergarten. So all of the social housing in Red Vienna was developed with kindergartens. Some of them had collective kitchens. There was an architect who also designed what was considered one of the kind of first functional kitchens, the way that we know it today, who designed the interior design, Margaret Lechowski, and it's called the Frankfurt Kitchen. So it was these kind of total living environments, including gyms, playgrounds, clinics, libraries, classrooms, music recital facilities. So for me, it was really inspiring to get to see some of these visuals. There's one in particular I want to, because it's so grand to think about the possibilities. This is the Rumenhof, and all of the details. This actually had that kind of a training for women around kind of aesthetics, massage, so kind of workforce development as we know it.
The green spaces are interesting. The way, when you show the overview, it was like on the interior of the building, sort of, and it led to other courtyards. And it kind of reminds me, kind of highlights the idea of what the Chelsea public housing, the green spaces are kind of central and important, and they want to destroy it.
Yeah, the green spaces are so important, and they're all public. So even though you walk in, they were public. And so they were the parks. There were no parks there in those neighborhoods. And so these were the public parks, and they're also communal spaces. I think about social and political life, right? How people organize and come together. These were also those spaces. So this is the Karl Marx Hof. You can see the amount of green space. And it was so tremendously huge. I was so about how big those spaces were. So this is the Karl Marx Hof. So you can see the inside of the space.
That's a nice quality of life.
I think critically, 5% of everybody's income tax, 0.5%, goes into this housing fund. So everybody is taxed for this. In order to, and most of the funding goes to infrastructure rather to individual housing vouchers. And this is used for both construction and refurbishment. And so I think a lot of folks probably read the article in the New York Times that came out a few years ago. I also put that in the chat. But another essential part of their housing tools is what they call limited profit construction and housing associations. And so what this means is that those who are developers can only charge the amount of rent that it costs. So they have to stay true to cost rather than making profit, or they make a little bit of profit. And this is actually the bulk of the social housing that's been produced over many years. I have so much information, but I know we're out of time. Maybe it's better just to kind of have a conversation about it if folks are interested.
I've always heard about Vienna, and I've seen, read about it and so forth. And I feel like we should learn from what they're doing and see how we can implement some of their processes.
Yeah, I definitely, to inspire folks about this is something that's possible. There's like COPA, right? There's TOPA, there's the Stock Transfer Act. There's lots of ways that we actually could, I think, through policy, create more housing. Rob raised the question, he's off the call now, about where do we get the land? And that is something that maybe Alex could also speak to, if we're going to create more, new housing. But I think I would say, look at the housing that we have, over 335 campuses. It's actually very parallel New York's public housing history to what was to the infrastructure. It was around 300 campuses, right? That was built they made 60,000 units originally. And so thinking about this, the tools for maintenance, we have this incredible infrastructure that we need. That's actually, I would say, sacred, it's sacred housing land that we need to invest in. And so how to take that funding and put them into already existing housing as well as create more housing. And in the community land trust movement, Alex, again, I think could probably talk to this from nicely's perspective, but they're looking at parking lots at, for example, churches that are now, donating their land, right? So public and private that can then be used and through COPA purchased, right, by community organizations to create social housing.
Luana and Rob and pointed out, and Damu had pointed out, Luana says Elliott Chelsea houses had all of those things before the divestment: communal spaces for pottery classes, youth groups, arts and recreation spaces, tutorial center, communal laundry room, and social workers. See, we see that. We see the remnants of it. We see the divestment that happened. And I think this is there was some good intentions when they built it, but they started deconstructing it almost not too long afterwards. And more valuable. NYC can learn from this. Well, like Luana pointed out, it was there, and maybe we can bring that back somehow. And Rob says, are we too late with these ideas? I would ask, how do you acquire land in New York City when the market dictates land availability? And that's why it's extremely important that we hang on to this public housing. Okay, we got to fight like the devil because they're looking to steal the land. They're looking to grab it. So it's very important we hang on to that because land is limited. And it's going to be impossible, I think, to get land under this environment, under the capitalist environment, under our economic system. And here's our Chelsea Public Housing Legal Defense Fund. We just put this up only last week, and we haven't really done a heavy marketing. We're over 11,000, so it shows promise. So if everybody can send this out on your links to your folks, to your friends, family, and help build that amount up, because we want to hire. It's just strictly for legal defense, and it's for right now. It's for the seniors. The seniors are in the crosshairs of the developers. Okay, they're pushing them out first. Renee, I saw Renee.
We're also working on the 2 buildings at Fulton Street on 19th Street, where the park's in front of, right next to Razzo and Sons. So it's getting those tenants out will allow for demolition to begin. The 90 days takes place on about October 26th, and then after that we have to start fighting harder. So yeah, they want them out, because if they get them out, they can demolish. You can't demolish a building with people in there and the electricity on.
Yeah, they already started moving them out.
Right.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
Just like this fight for Elliott, Chelsea, Fulton, that, Renee is really at, the center of holding with, as the tenant association president of Elliott, Chelsea, is about this place. And it's so much bigger, right? It's about all of NYC. Like, we need everybody to come on board and support and get behind and join this struggle, right? Because that is how we have to hold on to this public land, this housing, and be in solidarity with the people who are, at risk of losing their homes, which is, we're next, right? So I'm lucky enough to also live in social housing and want to reframe, right? Social housing, not, there's a lot of people, Renee, you talk about this, right? Who focus on social housing, community land trust. We need to understand public housing is our most valuable asset of social housing, and everybody in the CLT movement needs to join and get behind this fight with public housing. So
Talk about the actions we're doing. I think Sunday, right? We've got another food distribution on Sunday. Renee,
I believe this Sunday we'll be also doing a legal clinic, talking with people, letting them know their rights. We're also working on setting up another one with NYLAC at the same time. We have to get in contact with them, make sure it can be done. The more people know, the more education, the better. But one I also want to say is this is about public housing, but it's about all housing. I think we frequently see on the news that we are seeing older people, older tenants, people in rent stabilized, rent control housing are going through the same issues that NYCHA are. It's no different. We are the most long-standing tenants, and to get us out means that they can start doing this anywhere. It's not like there aren't landlords who owns whole blocks of buildings. Put them all in one building, demolish everything. This is going to be used as the standard. And frankly, if they get past us, and we don't think they will, they'll start using this everywhere else. Don't think it's not about you. They're after everything.
Yeah, well, they actually have started. Remember, they started in Chicago, then they went to Florida and Rockaway. I think that was what had happened. Now in New York, they've always been working on New York, of course, but Chicago was their first successful takeover, basically.
I just wanted to add too, the rates of older people going into homelessness for the first time are skyrocketing too, all over the country. And so again, if you're in a rent stabilized, situation and your landlord wants you out here, there you go. And I speak from experience. My ex-husband grew up on the Lower East Side. His parents were the super of the building. They threw them out in lightning fast time. This was in 2006 and they were in their 60s, so it's just brutal. They do not care. So thank you, Renee, for just emphasizing that point.
As I think of the powers that be taking advantage of the elderly first and foremost, right? And I call it elder abuse, really. It's a civil and a human rights violation. One of the things that, Stacey, as you were speaking, one of the things that you spoke about reminded me before the removal of a property here at Penn South, there was a McDonald's, and the elders used to gather in the McDonald's every day. And as you were saying, how, the cost was relatively cheap and they could get together and talk about each other and talk about things and just communicate and just gather together. They no longer had that space to do that, right? And most of the new spaces are sort of like, preppy kind of spaces where the elderly are not really welcome, right? And they didn't really kick them out of there. They let them stay there all day. And you would go there and you would see the elders there and you would say hi or whatever. After the McDonald's closed, when we did see the elders that used to frequent the McDonald's, they were more frail, they were less talkative, the things that happened to them because they lost that sense of community in that little McDonald's, right? It was very impactful. So when you think about the community of the seniors that are being, forced to move to vacate their property, and you think about the community that they have sustained during the time they lived there, you think about the effects of not having that community. So it's a really serious issue. It's not only us that's being affected, or the residents of the projects, but it is the community sense of gathering together and helping one another make it through each day, right?
Yeah, that's very nice sentiment, as always.
For those who don't know, on June 16th, MSCC, that's all of us here, won the 2025 Good Neighbor Award from Goddard Riverside. The acceptance speech was from John Mudd, very emotional. Just so you know, a video is going to come out about that, not to brag, but to emphasize that we are creative. For example, bringing fresh organic greens to seniors to draw them in to and let them know what the heck's going on. So that video is going to be paired with the Farm Initiatives video so that it's not this like bragging, oh, we won an award. So that is coming soon.
Thank you, Alex. Alex is doing some great work on the videos. If you haven't noticed them, go to our YouTube. I'll wrap up with two things. Yeah, City of Yes, we were a plaintiff on the City of Yes. It's looking good. Jack did a nice job litigating it. The other side was arguing at different points, and maybe we can give a recap of that at our next meeting.
Thinking about the City of Yes also, just for all of us to really be conscious of that, because actually Zoran Mamdani signed on to it, and I feel like it's very destructive, of our city. And just that's why, I mean, this video that he created that I started with was from years ago, but we need to make sure that this is front and center. I feel like whatever we can do to hold him accountable to, because if we're looking to him for some kind of possibility, which I think he's the only possibility, which is ridiculous. I believe in people power. We are the future, and it's all of us who actually make, him and our other politicians accountable. But I feel like this is such a pivotal moment. So just like when Red Vienna came in, it's like could be transformative if, folks are organized. And so I really feel like this fight to save Fulton Elliott Chelsea from demolition is, that's the heart, is like, at least in our community, to save our community, actually, right? Like what Renee was saying, it's like all of us, we have to hold that. This is all of our fight.
I feel like it's the front lines of the battle. We lose this, we're in really deep trouble. But not that we aren't now, but I'm serious. If we lose this battle, I really believe we'll be, I don't know, maybe move to Vienna.
Quick question for Caitlin. Caitlin, when you said Zoran Mamdani, or maybe I misheard, I heard you say that he signed on. So
Yeah.
What is that referring to? Did he cozy up to somebody who was like, because he's on the state? So I'm
Thank
confused.
you, Alex. I was thinking the same.
I feel like I might mix up the terms, but
He endorsed,
what?
right? He endorsed the.
There was I think the amicus brief from the city. They had people sign on to it to endorse, and he did. Brad Lander did.
Wow.
I'll try and get him in this space maybe next month. Try and get him in this space. I have his schedulers. I talked to his scheduler, so I'll try and get him in this space. Maybe we can have a discussion here.